else you're going to get in trouble. So kids become emotional stuffers. Then they become quite negative and critical. So think of this. If you are constantly in danger at home, guess what happens when you go to school, to church, to a public place to work? You look for danger because you're used to danger. You expect danger. So now when you walk into a social setting, you check out people to look for signs of danger. And what is your brain looking for? It's not looking for positive things. It's looking for negative things, because those are the dangerous things. So you've trained your mind to be negative, to look for negative. And then what happens, because you don't like yourself, nobody else seems to like you or want to be with you or connect to you, so you turn your negativity on yourself. You beat yourself up. You get down on yourself, you judge yourself harshly, and then you tend to have authority issues. So if mom and dad made you do a bunch of things, but they didn't live by kind of what they did, they didn't walk the talk, dad got angry, but nobody else was allowed to be angry, dad was able to be lazy, but nobody else could be lazy, you lose respect for that. And so you just start rebelling against that. You go, that's not healthy. And so anybody that's in authority, you're suspicious of. That they're going to abuse that authority because that's what's happened in your home. And then for many, they live by numbing and avoiding any uncomfortable emotion. So what happens with complex trauma is it starts with fear. But then it says, I don't like fear. That's painful emotion. Well, I don't like any pain because pain hurts. It hurts. So, okay, I don't like anything uncomfortable. So as soon as I get an uncomfortable emotion, I'm pretty sure it's going to end in pain. So as soon as I get an uncomfortable emotion, I want to get out of here. And so what happens for most people with complex trauma is the worst punishment you could give them is to sit all by themselves in a quiet room with nothing to do. Because then they'd have to sit with themselves. And that would be sitting with their emotions. That would be sitting with their thoughts. And So they got to be busy all the time. They got to be distracted. And so that's where video games, work, whatever, any type of distraction will enable them to avoid feeling. And so what the brain is doing, basically, it's saying we can't resolve the feelings, so let's stop feeling. So the key thing to understand about complex trauma is this. In a healthy home, if a child has pain, mom and dad give them tools and support so they can resolve the pain and fix the problem, and the pain goes away. It's resolved. It's resolved. They grow from it. It's a positive thing. What happens in complex trauma? The child wants to resolve the pain, but mom and dad aren't changing stuff. Their siblings aren't changing, being bullies to them. So they can't resolve the problem. They want to resolve it, but they can't resolve it. So what does the brain say? Well, if you can't resolve it, then we got to numb it. We got to stop feeling. That's the only way to resolve it. So that's why drugs becomes the perfect solution, because as soon as they find it, they go, oh, I just resolved all my negative feelings. I don't have to feel anything negative. And so the key for people in growing through their trauma and through their addiction is to realize, today, if I learn the tools, I can actually resolve the pain. I don't have to escape the pain, I can resolve the pain. That is scary, that is not fun, but it is a possible thing to do. So that escaping any uncomfortable emotion is a super common thing, because emotions are a scary thing. And in a child's mind, pain is never resolvable, so it's never going to lead to anything good, only more pain. So get out of there. And so we have to change that script, but that's a characteristic, okay? And then escape through fantasy. So one of the things that happens is I can't resolve the pain. So if I stay busy, or let's just escape into my head. So I can't change my outside world. I can't escape in my outside world. Let's escape into an inside world where it's safe. And so that's where a lot of people can dissociate in different ways, but they can have a fantasy life that just takes them out of their pain for a while and enables them to cope. And it seems like a good thing until they get to adult life. Okay, so that's 20 so far. I don't know if you got 20 out of 20. You probably should talk to me afterwards. Okay, I'm going to keep going, and you can keep kind of marking them off in your head. They usually operate by a double standard. So I mentioned that dad can be angry, nobody else can. Dad can sit around, nobody else can. Double standard all the time. Then the key piece is just to see how much fear takes over their life. So they have a fear of getting hurt, but then they have a fear of change. So if anything changes, something might happen that I wasn't expecting, and that might get me hurt. So they fear change. And that then means they fear the unknown. They fear the unknown and change. So can you see what's happening there? If I never change and I never face the unknown, then I'm safe. That's the child's thinking. And that sounds like a good plan. Do you realize that that becomes a prison when they get older? Because now I can't change. Because if I change, then something bad might happen. So I gotta stay the same, even though I hate it. So you're stuck. It's a rock and a hard place. I want to change, but I'm afraid to change. And that becomes a huge thing. And so what happens for a lot of people is they start to change, and they get, this is too scary, this is too scary. Let's sabotage the good stuff and go back to what's familiar. Because at least we can handle what's familiar, even though it's crummy. And so they tend to sabotage good things that happen in their life. Fear of failure, fear of success. So that partly is when everything that you've done has been criticized, bad things have happened, it's fallen apart, nobody's given the tools, so you've failed, and now good things start happening. People might expect more of me. I don't know how to handle this. I'm going to fail anyways. So now I'm afraid to even succeed. And that causes sabotage as well. They want to hope for a better life, but they're afraid to get their hopes up. So think of it this way. If a child wants their dad's love and they don't get it, a child has this amazing capacity to just keep hoping. If I just try harder, I must have done something wrong. It's my fault. If I just do more chores, dad will be happy with me. Or if I just get better grades in school, dad will be happy with me. So they get better grades, and dad seems happier. They get their hopes up, and then dad's the same old dad, and their hopes get dashed. And so now that hurts like crazy. But no, I'll try harder. And then they get their hopes up again, and then get dashed. What is fascinating in dealing with people that are raised with that kind of environment is around age 10 to 12, they finally come to a point where they go, you know what? Dad's never going to love me. Stop hoping. It hurts too much to hope. If you get your hopes up, it just hurts even more to have it all fall apart. Stop hoping. And so now what are you doing when people want to change their life in adult life? You're saying, get your hopes up, that things can be better. And they go, no, I've got my hopes up before. I know that game. That's a dangerous place. And so what you find is when people have complex trauma, not only do they have bad coping, And all these characteristics, and you can see this is just a child trying to survive, and so the brain says stop hoping. That's the best way to survive. That sounds like a good plan, but built into that is the prevention of any change or growth in the future. And it becomes a prison for them that keeps them stuck. And so the fear of getting their hopes up is just a massive thing for people to get through. Fear of abandonment. This is another huge fear. I think probably one of the most painful emotions a person can experience is to be abandoned. Because that is the ultimate statement from your parents or from somebody that you are a zero. You don't matter at all. So I'm abandoning you. It's the ultimate statement about who you are to a child. And so to a child, to be neglected is to be abandoned. It is a statement that you don't matter. It's a statement that you don't have value, you're not lovable. And so we're abandoning you. And so they take that all personally. And it is a painful, painful emotion to live with the feeling that anybody that gets to know me will abandon me. Because if the people that brought me into the world don't want a relationship with me that's intimate and safe, then anybody that gets to know me isn't going to want a relationship. So everybody will abandon me. That is a scary fear. So what happens then is they long for a relationship, but they're afraid of being abandoned if they get in a relationship. So they go into a relationship out of loneliness, out of longing for love, all of those good things, and then they get in a relationship, and then they're going to get to know me, then they're going to abandon me. I can't let them too close. And then they start playing games. They push them away, then they test them, and they sabotage the relationship, all because they're afraid of being abandoned. So it's, I'll abandon you before you abandon me. And so that fear messes up relationships. So what I want you to begin to see is complex trauma affects how they think about themselves. It affects their whole emotional world and makes it negative. It affects their relationships and their approach to relationships. Now let me take that a little bit further. Let me go back to the emotional part and just explain this to you. I mentioned adrenaline as the chemical flooding through the body when you're afraid. So that the brain part to that is the brain cortisol is the chemical in the brain, and that sets off adrenaline, okay? The brain is actually designed for three main chemicals. Dopamine, which is your fun pleasure chemical. Then there's serotonin, which is your overall feel-good chemical. And then there's oxytocin, which is your I'm in love, you're beautiful, I love you chemical. Those three chemicals are all warm, pleasurable, positive emotions. Your brain was designed that those were the three chemicals that would be in existence most of the time in your brain. What happens if there's neglect or abuse, those chemicals disappear. And so you don't have any of those pleasure chemicals in your brain, you just have cortisol. And cortisol's got fear going through you, and it's got you going in fight or flight. So the exact opposite of what your brain was wired for chemicals happens. Instead of getting the pleasure chemicals, the love relationship chemicals, you get pain, fear chemical. The exact opposite. It's a very tragic thing. And so again, what happens with drugs and alcohol, gambling, and all of those things? They release dopamine and in some cases serotonin in your brain through synthetic drugs stuff. The chemicals you should have got from loving human relationships, you get through a drug. And the person goes, this is what I've been wanting. And that's why the addiction takes over, is it makes up for the chemicals they never got from the loving human relationship. So guess what a person needs to get healthy? loving human relationships that are safe. What is the last thing that they want? Well, they want it, but they're afraid to death of it because they don't trust anybody. They're afraid everybody's going to abandon them once they get to know them. So the thing they need to heal, connection and love, is the thing that scares them the most, though they long for it the most. And so helping people with complex trauma, what we're finding is it's really, you got to teach them a lot of information, but they need that healthy connection they never got at home. They need a safe family that they never got at home. They need a bunch of time to learn the tools they never were taught at home about how to relate, how to deal with emotions, how to think. They have to be reparented if they are going to get healthy. So let me give you an example. All of us, I suspect, grew up riding a bike. So you turn a bike to the right and the bike goes to the right, turn it to the left and it goes to the left. So they actually did this study about 5 years ago where they took a bike and when you turn the handlebars to the right, the wheel goes to the left. How long do you think it would take you to ride that bike? So here's what I want you to understand. You understand in 1 second the concept, turn the handlebars to the right and the wheel go left. Okay, I got it, that makes sense, no problem. Turn it to the left, it'll go right. Just do the opposite. I got the concept. I understand the new tool. You realize it took about a year for people to ride the new bike properly. Because what would happen, as long as they were concentrating, okay, turn to the right if I want to go left. If they're concentrating, they could do it. But what happens if somebody said, hey, hi, how are you today? Oh, they'd go back to the old way of riding their bike, and they'd fall flat on their face. So it took about a year to get the programming to a subconscious, a bunch of new brain circuits. So what you're doing with complex trauma is you're taking people who've built brain circuits to handle pain, handle emotions, handle problems, handle people, do it this way, this way, this way, this way, and they've got those brain circuits reinforced for years. Now, those brain circuits are causing them problems. They come to me and they say, I want to change, and I go, here's the tools. Oh yeah, I get it. They get it in a second, and then they go to implement it. And they realize, this is going to take me a long time to get my brain rewired. Because that's really what you're doing, is you got to rewire the brain. So for people with complex trauma, it takes 1 to 10 years of living in a loving, supportive community where they're being taught and having tools modeled for them to relearn how to live in a healthy way. Because they weren't taught it the first time. Now, just think of that within kind of the Western way of handling sickness and problems. Our medical model is go to the doctor, step 1, 2, 3, take this pill, do this, and you'll be better by this day. Does not work with complex trauma. Because what happens is you make progress, then you get some memories, you get some triggers, you go back to old behaviors, you catch yourself, you apply the new tools, and you go back, forth. It's slow, it's messy. It's not a straight, simple, linear path like our medical model is. And so the whole approach to trauma has challenged the whole medical world because we've had to totally rethink how we approach people. The second thing that totally challenges our Western approach is the Western approach, the focus is on the body needs this medicine or this surgery. If we give it the medicine or the surgery, then they're going to be better. Complex trauma, the injury is not physical. The injury took place because of human lack of connection. And so the solution is not a medicine, or a surgery. The solution is rebuilding healthy, safe human relationships. It's built on connection. And the medical model is not built on human connections, it's built on medicine. Healing trauma is not built on medicine, it's built on connection. And that's a totally different approach. And so it's taking a while for many to understand that. So if you're wanting a good book, Dr. Bruce Perry from the States, who is the head of the National Institute for the Child Trauma Neurology something, but he's written a book with Oprah Winfrey called What Happened to You? And basically what he is saying is this: 90% of people who are homeless have childhood trauma. Over 90% of people in prison have complex trauma. Over 90% of drug addicts have complex trauma. Over 90% of people in the child welfare system have complex trauma. Over 90% of family violence, domestic violence, complex trauma. What's been our approach to that? We've gone with the question, what's wrong with you? We've looked at the symptom, and it's to change that to say, what happened to you? Because your behavior is the symptom of something that happened. And until we start working on the root and not just judging the symptom, we're never going to help people. So it's an excellent book that is very helpful. So let me give you another thing, and then I want to pause and just see if there's any questions. Within our brain, I'm going to really simplify this. So we have kind of 3 parts to our brain, big parts. So there's the brain stem, that's the very base of the brain that develops first, and that controls our organs, that controls all our subconscious systems, our blood pressure, our pulse, our digestive system, all of those things. Brain stem, it just operates, so that keeps us alive. Okay, then we have the limbic system, and that's the child brain. It develops well for the child, and that's what the child operates, is that part of the brain. That's the emotion center of the brain. And it's also the survival system, because that's where fear takes place. So that's the trauma part of the brain. So it makes sense that it's the child's brain, because how does a child think? Based on their emotions, how they're feeling. So you say to a child, okay, it's Saturday morning, you got to do your chores. I don't feel like it. They base decisions based on what they feel, not based on whether it's a good decision or not. Or if you said to a child, would you like broccoli or a chocolate bar? They'd probably go with a chocolate bar because it would make them feel good right now. They don't think 10 years from now, 20 years from now. They think instant gratification. So the child brain, the limbic brain, is concerned about instant protection or instant pleasure. It doesn't think about what's healthy. It doesn't think about 10 years from now. It doesn't think about consequences. It just thinks about instant gratification. So complex trauma, you're in fear. Limbic brain, fight, flight, instant protection. You don't care about long-term consequences. You got to get safe now. What happens when you stay in complex trauma is the last part of your brain doesn't develop properly, which is the adult part, the cortex, which is the thinking part, the wise part, the part that starts to think of consequences, that thinks long-term, the part that weighs out pros and cons of decisions, that thinks things through, and it makes decisions not based on how it's feeling, but based on whether it's healthy, whether it's the right thing to do. That's the wise cortex. But a person in their limbic brain, because of complex trauma, they stay operating out of their limbic brain even into their adult life, because they're still thinking of danger. I got to stay safe now. I can't think of in terms of long-term consequences. And so if you look at every addict, an addict, we try to teach them, play the tape to the end. Because we know they just think about, I need my next fix, I need something to take me out of the pain, I need my high, instant gratification. And so a huge challenge is teaching people who've thought like that all their life, out of necessity, to begin to think long term, to begin to think of consequences, to begin to weigh out stuff and make decisions not based on what they think, what they feel, but what they think. So most people who are addicts are great for the first couple months of recovery because they feel like doing recovery. They just had a terrible bottom. They hate what they've done to their kids. They hate that they were put in prison. They hate that they got in trouble and lost their job. And they're motivated to change. And then they start changing and they start a routine and they do the work. But what are routines to people that have lived in chaos and drama? Routines are boring. And so all of a sudden I go, this recovery is boring. I don't feel much excitement happening here. And so they're still in their limbic brain, and their limbic brain is saying, I am bored, so I don't feel like doing it. And they stop doing recovery. And so we want to teach them to get to a point where they go, I'm going to keep doing recovery regardless of how I feel. How I feel today isn't consequential. It's what's healthy today. And that is a massive difference for a person coming out of complex trauma. Okay, I'm not going to get very far here, but let me give you just a couple other fears. One of the big fears that many people have that come out of complex trauma is, I don't like myself. So the only way I'm going to feel good about myself is if you like me. So if you feel good about me, then I can feel good about me. So that means I can never say no to you. I have to please you all the time. So I can't set boundaries with you. So I'm afraid to say no to everybody because then you might not like me. But I need you to like me for me to like myself. And so there's this huge fear of saying no. And then the last fear I'll mention is there's a fear of being a burden. So what happens in neglect and abuse to a child is you're always made to feel that you're a burden to your parents, that they prefer not to have you, that you're just extra work for them, that they wish they didn't have. And so now in adult life, you have legitimate needs and you can't meet those needs. You need others to help you, but you're afraid to be a burden. So you're afraid often to ask others to help you when you have legitimate needs that you can't meet. And that keeps a lot of people stuck because they're afraid to ask for help because they're afraid to be a burden. Okay, let me tell you how many we went through there. So that was 30 out of 60. Don't know how many you had, but I'll just tell you this up front. If I give you the whole test of 60 and you have 20, then you have complex trauma. So we've just done 30, and if you've already got 20, then you've got the symptoms of a person that's had to live in this survival mode of doing things to survive that now in adult life are causing problems. So that's what we've been looking at, is the ways of coping that children have. So the final thing I'll say, then I'll open it up for any questions you might have, is most people that come out of complex trauma, they look at all those behaviors now that they do and they get down on themselves. Oh, I keep wearing masks. I hate myself. I keep telling lies. And they beat themselves up. And so their attitude towards self is one of judgment. And what research has shown and my experience has shown is people don't truly change in an attitude of self-judgment because you just keep beating yourself down until you're not motivated. True change happens when you change that internal posture to one of self-compassion. And what that means is, I go, you know what? I'm not going to beat myself up that I spent years wearing masks and manipulating. I had this to survive. It wasn't I sat down at 3 and said, what can I do to screw up my life? No, I was trying to survive in very difficult circumstances. I'm not going to beat up that little child for trying to survive. And so now I am still dealing with the after effects of that. There's no value in beating myself up. Now I need to ask myself, okay, let's be curious about why I do that, or why I felt I should do that today. What triggered me to feel I should do that? So that I understand what's going on underneath the behavior. What emotions was I feeling? What thoughts were going through my head that caused that behavior to come out? Because if I can understand that, then I can start to change that and heal that, and then the behavior will take care of itself. And so changing that internal attitude from self-judgment to self-compassion is a massive shift for people, but so important. Okay, any questions that anybody has in all of this? Mark. You gotta put the mic on.
There it goes, it's on, okay. So I'm Mark Husey, I'm the music director here, and I figured I'd ask the first question to show you how we'd like you to ask your questions with the microphone. Coming up and saying, hi, I'm Mark. And I'm so thrilled to have you here, Tim. Thanks so much for being with us. So my question's in 2 parts that I think will help crack open some of this for other people that are looking to how we can thrive beyond trauma. You mentioned masks, and it's just, that's a good term that I'm accustomed to using because I've been in your program. Plus, we've also had a pandemic. So we're used to wearing a kind of mask, but I know you're not talking about that kind of mask. So right now, I'm wearing some social lubrication as music director here about being formal and professional and attempting valiantly to speak in a complete sentence. So that's, I'm kind of answering my own question, but I want you to elaborate a little bit more on that. And if you could, secondly, how do you begin to drop that mask when you establish a more intimate, that's a huge thing, but yep. So first of all, just tell us what is the mask you're speaking of, and then how do we learn to drop that without dropping it too soon?
Yep.
Thanks.
Excellent question. Okay, so let me come at it this way. Every child comes into the world with 2 impulses that, well, they come in with many impulses, but 2 that are big. One is to connect, and one is to be authentic. So every child wants to connect with mom, dad, with friends, and every child just is naturally themselves. So what tends to happen in complex trauma homes is there's lack of connection. Mom and dad are too busy. Mom and dad are always criticizing them. Mom and dad are cold. So there's not that healthy connection because mom and dad aren't present and attuned to their needs. So their thinking is, because mom and dad are always criticizing them and making it their fault, is it's because I'm authentic that's causing me to not be able to connect. So the way to truly connect with people is to be fake. So I will adapt my personality. So if I'm a very shy person, well, I will try to become outgoing. I will try to be flirty. I will try to be always pleasant and pleasing people. And so they try to become what they think people want in order to, so that people will want to be their friend and connect with them. So usually what happens is the mask that they begin to wear, their fake, is partly their true personality, but it's a bunch of fake stuff as well. because they can't be totally 100% themselves. They can only be 10, 20% and then try to add stuff that's not really them. And so what makes it challenging in helping people is it's not like it's 0 and 100 and you just stop one and replace it. There's a bit of the true you mixed in with the fake you that's developed. And so it's distinguishing between the true you and the fake you. And so you don't do that overnight, and you don't even know how to do that overnight, because one of the characteristics that I didn't get to is people that have had to be fake to survive get to adult life and they don't even know who they are for sure. They don't know, am I outgoing or am I shy? I'm not sure. Am I organized or messy? I'm not sure. Am I artistic or am I super logical? I'm not sure. So they just don't know because they've spent so much time playing roles to please people that they're not even sure the true them. And so you gradually begin to sort that out. So, Mark, it's a very complicated question. And the other piece I would add, so I could say, I think I could say honestly that I'm being very authentic tonight. But this is not how I act when I'm at home all by myself. I don't stand here and talk when I'm at home or if I'm with my wife. So I'm authentic, but it comes out in a different way when I'm with my wife, when I'm with my children. So I'm still me as far as my personality. I'm not trying to be something I'm not, but it comes out in different settings based on what parts of me show up in that setting to be the true me and to help people. And I think that's partly what you're getting at is when you're here doing music, you are the music person, but you can be very authentic in that. But it's also very possible that there can be some of that shame fake you that says, I better just turn on these certain things that I know aren't me in order to get people to like me. And so it's that journey of finding out, okay, this is me, that's the fake part, how do I give that up? Because if I give that up, people might not like me. So one of the things that was really interesting is, so when I was a young pastor, every pastor I knew was an extrovert. Then here comes me and I'm a severe introvert. And I go, how do you be an introvert and be a pastor? Well, I could try to be like all the other pastors, and I go, I can't do that. I'm going to be an introvert pastor and figure out how to do that. And a lot of people aren't going to like it because I'm not going to fit the mold, but I'm going to be that. And I'm glad I did. I learned a lot, and it provided a strength in pastoring that extroverts didn't have, but I wasn't able to do what some extrovert pastors could. And so what you begin to realize is I can't please everybody, but I can be myself, and that's the best I can be. Because as soon as I try to fit all these roles and please everybody, what ends up happening is I burn myself out, and then I get to the point I can't say no to people and be myself because I don't want to disappoint or upset. And that then causes problems for me internally. So it's just a very complicated, slow journey in figuring that out, I guess, is the bottom line. And I think a lot of people that come out of complex trauma are very afraid that, because they know they've worn masks, and they just want to be able to dump in one day all their masks and be totally authentic in one day. And I go, it's just not possible, because you just don't even know who you are. So you don't even know what is a mask and what is true. So you got to give yourself permission to start a journey of figuring out who you are and what is fake, and then shedding those fake parts as you go. And be very gracious with yourself, because you're not going to get this overnight, especially the mask part. Yeah. Any other questions?
Hello, I'm Alex, and I operate a treatment center. And we have a lot of problems with fentanyl and crystal meth these days. And before we can address anything around the trauma, we're having problems with people actually being able to be in their body long enough to actually get to anything. Do you have any suggestions?
It's a huge issue that I think all communities are dealing with as far as trying to be realistic. And so harm reduction has become a thing where you have safe using sites for people and all of that, because they're going to use anyway, so let's not have them using dirty needles and making things worse and all of that. And so to me, there's value in that. But what I think anybody that's worked in addiction knows, especially in the era of crystal meth and fentanyl, is as long as they stay addicted to that, they're no good in society to anybody and to themselves. And it's only a downhill journey. It's never going to level off. It's always getting darker and darker and needing more and more. And so you can have harm reduction for a period of time, but hopefully in that time, you're planting seeds that get them to want to get abstinent. Because if they don't, they can't just use a bit here and there. It's just not possible anymore. Can I back up and just give everybody a technical thing? So I told everybody that the main chemical for drugs and alcohol, gambling, sex, all of the addictions, both activity addictions and chemical addictions, is dopamine in the brain, which is the pleasure. So we can actually measure dopamine in the brain. So dopamine, we get through all kinds of natural things. So if we were to measure the dopamine in your brain right now with you sitting there, we'd call it, just to make a graph, your baseline, your 0, okay? And then if you were to go and have your favorite supper, steak, lobster, whatever it is, then you would get pleasure happening in your brain, and we'd measure it and we'd mark it 1, just to make a graph, okay? Then you go and have your favorite all-time natural activity. So for most people that has a sexual component, and what we find is that it actually has only twice as much dopamine as eating food. So you end up with a graph of doing nothing to your favorite activity that goes from 0 to 2, okay? Do you know how much dopamine, using that scale, which is a very small scale, how much dopamine would be in your brain if you were to take a hit of crystal meth? It would jump to 12. So that's 6 times the pleasure of sex. So that gives you a bit of an insight into the huge draw of those drugs. And fentanyl, it's also an opioid, so it's a calmer, and I won't get into it, but it also does dopamine, but it's very high as well. And so what you have to understand is your body, your brain was not made to run at 12. It was made to run at 2, 0 to 2. So when you get to 12, it panics and it goes, we are going to burn out. So it starts changing chemical makeup so that what felt like 12, the next day only feels like 10. Then it changes more chemically because you keep taking more now, because I'm not getting quite the same hit as before. And it's going, oh, this isn't helping. So now what used to feel like 10 now only feels like 5. And before you know it, it changes chemically to the point where what used to feel like 12 now feels like 0. So a person doesn't smoke crystal meth or take fentanyl anymore to get high. They do it just to feel normal, just to get out of bed, just to get through the day. And that's because the brain has changed chemically in order to survive. Okay, here's the problem. If you were to quit crystal meth and fentanyl, your brain would change back the way it used to be chemically, so you get the natural pleasure again, and life would go back to being normal. But let's say 10 years from now you relapsed and picked up crystal meth and you took a hit and you got your 12. Within one day, that would feel like 0. Your brain would go back to the old chemical makeup. And so what happens when the brain has changed that much chemically, when a person's been addicted to those powerful drugs, if you relapse, you don't slowly just kind of use it casually again. It just goes back to that old chemical makeup and you feel like it's a 0 again. So you cannot, a person who's been truly addicted cannot just go back to being a casual user. It's just impossible. And that's what I was talking about with you. And so the challenge is their only possible answer is eventual sobriety or abstinence. But you can't get them there necessarily overnight. They're not necessarily going to go to rehab or to detox or cold turkey it. And so we developed a program. So just for all of you for information, so Mark has taken our online 15-week program for people with trauma, complex trauma, and it doesn't have to have addiction. They could have an addiction. They realize, hey, I got some issues in my life, and I'm not dealing well with my emotions, I'm not dealing well with relationships, not dealing well with losses. I need some help, and I think it's tied to my childhood. I just don't quite understand how. So we have on our website, timfletcher.ca, we have a program called LIFT, which is a 15-week program. So it's got teaching video, homework, hour-and-a-half Zoom class that people are involved in, and then availability of one-on-one counseling. And that just gets them going. And then after that, they can continue to be involved as much as they want for as long as they want, so that they can continue to work on their stuff, stay connected, keep growing. And we've just seen wonderful things happen out of that. But we also developed, for people that work with people on the street, something we call En Route. And it's basically a way for, if you get people for just a day who are sober, you sit down to an hour thing with them that's on the brain, on trauma, that plants a seed. And then hopefully it takes root down the road and they go, you know what, I'm done with this. I'm going to go to that and get some real help. But some people are willing to go right into detox and get it done with, but others aren't, and we meet them where they're at and just plant seeds. And so we developed that program as a way just to give people tools to help them be able to give that information to people. So hopefully that helps. Any other questions? So what I tried to do tonight is give you like an 80 hours worth of teaching in 1 hour, and so you realize it's impossible, and I hardly scratched the surface of it. But what I want you to understand is just there's a growing, in the last 10 years, especially the last 3 to 4, since COVID, there's been this growing awareness that we've got some serious issues that we got to start looking at, and more and more people are starting to realize this is tied into childhood stuff. And the goal is not to blame parents and say you're terrible. The goal is to understand, how did what happened to me in childhood shape me and affect how I see myself, how I cope, and how I relate to others. And as I begin to understand that, then I begin to be able to heal that and change that so that I can get healthy today. And that's been the whole body of what we do in teaching and counseling, is to help people work on that. So again, if you want more information, the website timfletcher.ca, you can look that up and submit any questions that you might have, and we'll do what we can to answer them. I'll hang around for just a little bit if you want to ask me anything, but it's been a pleasure to... Oh, sorry. Dr. Bruce Perry has written a book called What Happened to You. And it's with Oprah Winfrey. Yes. Get it on Audible, get it on Barnes and Noble. Yeah, it was one of the, is very good seller. Came out in 2020, so it's still new. It's basically his 40 years of brain research and trauma, all synthesized into layman's terms, and it's just a very, very well done book with lots of illustrations that help people understand the effect of trauma and what we're understanding on the brain, on the body. What we now, and he talks about this extensively, and Dr. Gavin Mate does as well, and his book is called In the Realm of Hungry Ghosts. But what we now understand is because of all that cortisol in the body, is that 90% of Western illness is related to stress or cortisol. So because of stress or cortisol, 90% of the health problems, heart disease, lung disease, cancers, diabetes, are all getting tied now to cortisol, stress, complex trauma. And so what we're seeing is complex trauma is making us physically sick as a society because of the effect of cortisol on the body. So that's just, again, a fascinating area of research that more and more research keeps coming out. But it's, yeah, it's all available to read in those books.
What is the author's name?
Bruce Perry. Perry. Yeah. Okay. Thank you for coming.